Hello, welcome to the channel. My name's Gareth. I'm a 60-something living in the Midlands in the UK, and I thought I'd take you through the process I followed when I took the biggest decision that most of us take in the second half of our lives, and that's when do we stop work? When do we kind of retire? So, yeah, on one level, of course, it just involves a load of calculations, including rates of return and pension arrangements. But there are also a few other factors which I think are just as important, which sometimes don't get actually taken into account by a lot of people who sort of drift into retirement. So what I'm going to do in this video is, yes, focus a bit on how to come to a decision financially, but also I want to deal with the other elements, and I'm going to take you through my story about how I made the biggest decision about retirement that I've made so far, and the factors that went into it, and maybe they're the sorts of things that you're thinking about. But my story perhaps takes a slightly different turn a bit later on, and I'll take you through it. So the way I'm going to structure this video is I'm going to first of all deal with the kind of the written down stuff, what you need to think about, but I'm not really going to focus on the numbers so much. You can get that elsewhere, I'm absolutely certain. But then I'm going to take you through the other elements which I took into account when I took my retirement decision. And spoiler alert, things don't actually go the way you think they might in my particular story. Anyway, let's get started. For this, I'm going to go and sit up at my desk because I want to write stuff down and I want you to see what I'm actually thinking about. Okay, let's go. Okay, so let's start with a few thoughts on what, if I can find my pen. 1 second. Couldn't make it up, could you really? Anyway, what I was going to say was, I'll write all this down on this notepad here. So for me, the big question is, sorry, just make sure you can see me here. The big question is, can or should I retire? Okay, now for me, the question is, and I've worded it like that because there are two elements to this. The first one is it actually feasible for me to retire at all at this stage? Do I have the funds? That sort of stuff. But the second one is a bit more, we'll come on to the second one, which is, should I actually retire at this stage? And that's the one which I think nobody or very few people actually address head on. Okay, so let's start with can. All right, so let's list some of the factors that we've got here. The first one is just the obvious one. How big is my savings pot? Then the other factors are, how much do I expect to spend in the future when I'm retired? Other factors that affect whether I can afford to retire are things like inflation in the future, what the rate of return will be on my assets, on my pot. Then there are other factors which are kind of a bit less monetary based. So they are what's my state of health now and in the future? What is it that I actually want to do with my retirement? What equals happy in retirement? And I think it's worth stopping here and just saying the assumption that everybody makes is if they can retire, they will retire because work is horrible and they want to stop it as soon as they can. And they often, it feels to me like people are running away from their work, but they don't really know what they're running towards, if that makes sense. So their clarity around how they're going to spend their retirement And we know this is a well trodden path. People don't tend to actually work out what they're going to do, and then they find that they're sort of scratching around and bored when they actually get retired. Okay, and here's another one. How old do I plan to be when I die? And yeah, I know it's a bit facetious, but you know what I mean. Okay, so for me, these are all factors around retirement. But the question is kind of what do we know? I'm going to use a different color pen for this because I'm going to overlay these. What do we know and what can't we know or don't we know? So if I just go through this, we know what our savings pot is now. We can kind of know. We can budget. You know, so I'm going to put a tick against spending as well. Do we know about inflation? What inflation is going to do over the next 30 years? No, we don't. Do we know what rate of return we're going to get over the next 30 years? No, we don't. Okay, let's come on to the other side. Do we know our health now? Absolutely, we do. Do we know what it's going to be like in the future? Absolutely, we don't. And then what is our expectation in terms of what we're going to do with our lives to make ourselves happy in retirement? We kind of know. I think we kind of know what that is. I'm going to give it a tick because I think if we actually thought about it, we'd probably come up with a plan if we haven't got one already, and it may be something that we've been targeting for 40 or 50 years. And I get that. I do understand that. Okay, and then here's the biggie: age of death. And obviously, we don't know when we're going to die. I've obviously I'm sort of skewing this towards a conclusion, and for me, the big conclusion here is, and we've not mentioned it anywhere so far, it's the R word. And it's risk. Where we don't know stuff, that's a risk. Where we can't know stuff, that's obviously a bigger risk. And so, yes, we've got a savings pot. Is that savings pot going to be big enough? We can't know. So because we don't know when we're going to die. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is ultimately there is a level of risk associated with retirement, and there's nothing you can do about it. There isn't any workaround unless you have a pension arrangement which is now virtually extinct, which is a defined benefit pension scheme where basically you know what your what your income is going to be for the rest of your life. They are very rare these days. If you've got one, well done, keep it. Don't cash it in. You've got to keep it. That's my non-financial advisor advice. See your financial advisor for all of this stuff. But the other way you can do stuff is you could change your pension, your savings pot into what's called an annuity, which effectively will assume that you're going to die according to the actuaries, which is something like 14 or 15 years time if you're 65, maybe 20 years time, and they will pay you. And if you live longer than that, they'll continue to pay you. That sounds attractive until you actually look at the rates that they offer you, and maybe it's not quite so attractive after that. The big thing, though, is we're going to be in a world of risk here, and there's nothing we can do about it. Okay, back to the sofa now, because I want to explain where I'm going with this. We're going to take a punt. We're going to have a risk associated with our retirement date. We can mitigate that risk in a few ways. Firstly, we don't have to retire. We don't need to retire because we are 65, 66, 60, 70, whatever. We don't have, happily these days, in many of the sort of industrialized countries, you're not forced into retirement because you hit a particular age. So we don't have to retire. That obviously reduces the risk associated with having enough money for the rest of our lives, because we're not spending any, and in fact we're probably allowing our pot more time to grow. So not retiring is a perfectly valid option. Maybe not as attractive if you've built your whole adult life around racing and kind of deferring all of your gratification to the point where you stop work. That may be a bit of a problem. The other one is to retire and make sure you reduce the risk associated with retirement in any way you possibly can. And for me, that normally means making sure that you never spend in a way that might put any kind of future savings pot at risk. So you always live within your means. You're always only spending your investment return. You're never spending any of your capital. All of those sorts of ways. The issue with that, obviously, is it means that you are somebody at the door. It means that you are it means that you might end up getting to the end of your life and leaving your beneficiaries of your will an enormous savings pot, which no doubt they'll be extremely grateful for. But I guess that's not kind of going to help you maximize the benefits of all your hard work over your life. So I'm just assuming that that's not something you want to do. So we're kind of, it feels like we're no further forward. What I'm trying to say here, though, is this is where you actually have to move off the kind of financial element and understand what you really want to do with your life. Now you are, let's just call it 60 plus. And in order to kind of put some perspective on this, I'm going to tell you about what I'm doing with my life and the things which have influenced me through it. So this is going to be my retirement story, if you like. And spoiler alert, you're going to need to hang on if you think you know where this is going. All right, I'll catch up with you in a minute, because I'm going to do this as I go for my normal daily walk, because this is always a good place for me to be in terms of thinking, and I'll be thinking out loud while we do this. So I'll catch you in a minute. Okay, welcome to my walk. So let's go through the things which affected me when I came to make my kind of big decision to address the whole retirement question, which happened to me about 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm going to take you through the factors which I took into account in coming to the decision. First of all, just to say, the countryside around here is very nice, and I'm very lucky to be based around here. But that leads into what I have in the way of training and how I have earned my living during my sort of work. Now I'm just going to break off while I say hello to some friends who are just coming past. Okay, sorry about that. Got into a long conversation with a neighbour of mine. I have earned a living for the past 25 years or so in the whole kind of digital IT sphere as a freelance consultant, basically rolling out programs of work for big organisations. It's kept me off the streets, which is nice. And it's earned me a reasonable living for 25 years. It was, as I'm self-employed, it meant that there were sort of gaps in my time, but they have been mercifully few. The biggest one obviously was COVID, where I basically spent 6 months on the bench, as we say, nothing coming in. But that's kind of how it works, and you kind of you go along with that when you buy into the whole idea of working as a freelancer. So I guess the big question is, what's my financial position like at the moment? Let's say it's reasonable, it's good enough to make it a possibility, or it was a couple of years ago when I was making this decision to make retirement a possibility. Let's put it at that position. Whether looking at the other factors which are not all financial, and I'm going to break this into three. And the first one is what really interests me in life, and I'm really interested actually in the world of business. I really find it fascinating. I find it amazing the different ways that people find to make money, the different ways people earn a living, and the fact that there are many ways in which you can become very financially comfortable off, but they all tend to come with caveats and things like that. And that for me is a major interest. I've always been interested in all of that. And that was what prompted me around the turn of the century to actually leave the blue chip I was working for and go out on my own. So the whole world of business and entrepreneurialism and all of that stuff is something which I find fascinating. So that's kind of a thing which I kind of enjoy to the point where I would do it for nothing almost, but that kind of is a bit self-defeating. But the second area to consider is kind of family, and family for me consists of a couple of grown-up children and my wife of 25 years. Just hang on a minute, I just need to go down a steep slope and I need to concentrate. Okay, safely negotiated. So my wife, Susie, we have been very, very lucky both second time round, and we have not regretted a day of it. So we're very lucky in that respect, and we've been married for 25, 26 years now. And then there's the extended family as well. And then there are other factors that come from family. And in my case, probably the biggest one for our discussion now is the impact of my own dad on the way I see the world. I'd just give you a quick potted history of the guy. He was the son of a farm labourer in South Wales in the UK, and he himself had to leave school at 14, and he basically started labouring himself, and decided he wanted something better, and he joined the Air Force as soon as he could. It proved to be an astonishingly good fit. He was an absolutely natural pilot, and the RAF recognised it. Cutting to the chase, he ended up flying. Aircraft fans will know the Vulcan. He ended up as a senior Vulcan pilot in the early 60s, around the coldest of the Cold War periods, and he stayed with the RAF until about 1974, where he decided that he needed to find challenges elsewhere. He basically had got to the point where he couldn't keep flying and stay in the RAF. He'd reached the sort of maximum seniority he could in that case. So he left and he went out to the Middle East, as people did in the 70s, took the Middle Eastern money, stayed out there for another 5 years, came back and flew until basically he was stopped by the rules, and then stopped altogether. Now, the reason why I'm telling this story and the big influence he had on me, firstly, he showed me that there are no excuses. You know, you can think up. I could hide behind things which have happened in my past, but frankly, they were nothing like he had to put up with, and therefore he stripped that sort of poor me right out of the question as far as I was concerned. He had his numerous, as we all do, numerous weaknesses, but indolence and laziness were definitely not two of them. Anyway, he followed the path that people in the generation above us took in life. All his pensions were all defined benefit pensions. In other words, they basically, you swapped your paycheck for a pension check and it continued to the end of your life, albeit a bit less. So he had all of that. He had that financial background. Sorry, he had that financial situation behind him. So when he got to 65, he stopped work entirely. Now, bearing in mind, this was a man who literally, I mean, you could argue he had the fate of millions in his hands at one point, but he was always very aware of the world, very switched on, knew what was going on, and took a great deal of interest in all of these things. When he stopped work, I was amazed by the change which came upon him. He turned into, didn't turn into a different person, but you could see effectively the bit of tension he had in his life just disappear. It looked like his race had been run. It sounded like his race had been run. He was always interested in golf. He played golf 3 times a week. He saw his friends. And in some respects, that sounds absolutely idyllic, I'm sure. But I could see the way that his worldview changed in as much as he stopped taking as big an interest in all of the world. And in some respects, I think it kind of diminished his enjoyment of the world. And so eventually he died about 3 or 4 years ago. And this is all bound up in the point that I was talking about, the big retirement decision. I'm just going to break off here just to show you where I am at the moment. Just crossing a stream, and yes, very nice. Anyway, sorry. He was when he stopped, his worldview shrunk, and I was obviously, when he died about 3 years ago, by that time, he died, incidentally, aged 93. A good innings, as we say here in the UK. And I thought about his life and what I could learn from it, as you do in that sort of post-death, when you're left when they've left us. And I thought, well, there are lots of things that I admired about him, but I think his sort of raison d'etre kind of went out of his life when he stopped having that tension. And so I thought about my own situation around this time, and retirement was definitely on the horizon. And I thought, what do I enjoy? I actually enjoy my work. And I thought, okay, if I enjoy my work really, if I keep that element of tension going for me, perhaps that's something worth considering rather than retiring altogether. Maybe there's something else going on here. So I then did, as I always do, you've already seen it even in this video, I wrote the stuff down and thought about it, And I thought, well, okay, what are my options? One, stop all work. Plus is, I don't get idiots that I have to work with all the time. On the other hand, those idiots that I have to work with all need careful handling, and the challenge of handling an idiot is something which I thoroughly enjoy. The second point about giving up altogether was that they would all go, which is a plus, but it's also a minus. Financially, it would mean that we'd have to cut our cloth according to our means, bearing in mind that my firm belief is that it's best to plan on the idea that if you're 60, you've got at least another 30 years to come, and in my case, possibly more, bearing in mind my dad lasted till 93. So the genes are probably worth mentioning there. So the financial thing is by no means clear cut, and in fact in my case it's probably a real factor. Nevertheless, the possibility of stopping entirely is still there. The third option is basically to ignore the age element and see what happens work-wise. In other words, keep working. You say, well, okay, do you really enjoy work enough to stop working? And that was a question which I thought I would mull over. And while I mulled it over, I would continue with my work. And since that point, I've actually had I've basically started another contract, which will keep me going for a bit longer. And gradually it's become obvious to me that I don't really want to stop work. And I don't see why I should. I think I'm competent, and the market will tell me when I'm no longer competent, and my extreme old age is a factor in me getting work. It doesn't seem to be there yet. So why would I stop exactly? Because my working means we don't have to cut our cloth. It means there's longer for the savings we've got to accumulate more interest. So why exactly was I going to stop work? I can't. Now I struggle to think of a good reason. So my takeaway from this is there are lots of options around retirement. The most obvious one is to calculate your retirement income and live within it, and hope you don't run out of cash by the end, or hope that your relatives will look after you or something like that. To me, I'm not sure that is the only option. The second option is to ignore retirement and keep going. And I've kind of said that, yes, but on the other hand, no, because I'm not suggesting I will never stop. But I'm sure that the market is going to tell me when I have to stop work, and at that point I'll consider stopping. But the decision I made three years ago was that I was going to keep going. And that's what I've done. And I haven't regretted a minute of it. And so I'm going to continue doing that. And can I just recommend that before you pull the retirement trigger, you think about this as an option too. And the other thing I would say though is, if you really hate where you work, and I get it, the reason why I no longer work for a large blue chip organisation in the City of London is because I just could not stand it any longer. And so I know and I completely sympathise with people who are at that position and they're due to retire. I get it. But all I would say is, have you thought, nearly fell over there, have you thought that maybe there is an alternative way of keeping to work that takes you maybe uses your skill set, generates income, represents a challenge. And there are two, I'm just going to mention before finishing that there are two books that I thoroughly recommend reading before you pull the retirement trigger. One is a book called The 100-Year Life. Can't remember the name of the authors while I'm out here in the field. That is a real eye-opener, and it's based on a premise which you can easily just glibly say, well, that ship has sailed for me. I'm now 65. I don't have the options that they talk about in that book. But when you actually look at what they're proposing for the sort of third stage of life, you have got those options just because you haven't done what they recommend at the beginning. So The 100-Year Life is one. And the other one is a book called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. If you've not come across him before, he's worth investigating. He's not everybody's cup of tea. His writing style is not everybody's cup of tea. You have to concentrate to read it. But what he says seems to me to be a real eye-opener too. He basically says the element of tension in our lives keeps us healthy, keeps us switched on. And this comes right back to my dad and his experience. The element of tension in his life was clear, and when he stopped it, it felt to me like he shrank as an individual. His life seemed to get smaller, and to me that is a perfect example of what Nassim Nicholas Taleb talks about in his book. It's an absolute corker, and I would recommend it wholeheartedly if you're thinking of retiring, because you need a bit of tension. You need something in your life to give it meaning. And if for 40 or 50 years your work has been giving you that tension and meaning, beware stopping it immediately. Anyway, I'm on my way back now, as you can probably tell. I hope you found it interesting, and I'll catch up with you next time. If I could just ask, if you've managed to get it to this point in the video, I'm amazed, frankly, but could I just ask that you like it or subscribe to it, and even more importantly, comment, because I know this is not the route that the vast majority of people are aiming for, but I think it's worth thinking about no matter what stage you're at. Anyway, talk to you soon.